Today we are looking at a developing story that has generated significant attention among Iraqi Dinar followers, particularly because the information being circulated claims that Iraq has confirmed a decision to change its currency and remove zeros from the existing dinar denominations. Now, before we go any further, there is an extremely important distinction that needs to be made. A decision to remove zeros from a currency is not automatically the same thing as a currency revaluation that suddenly makes the dinar worth dramatically more against the US dollar. Those are two different monetary concepts, and understanding that difference is essential if we want to analyze this story responsibly. The information provided for today's discussion comes from a report being circulated on the 16th of August, 2026, in which an individual claiming to be in Iraq said that the news had been confirmed by the Minister of Communications, Mustafa Sindh. The claim reportedly stated that Iraq has decided to change the currency and remove zeros from it, while also saying that no implementation date had yet been established. A media article was then presented as supporting evidence for that statement. That is certainly more substantial than an anonymous social media comment with no supporting material. However, it is still important to separate what the article reportedly says from what has actually been formally established through Iraq's monetary authorities and official government channels. In financial markets, especially when dealing with currency policy, terminology matters enormously. A media report saying that a minister confirmed the decision is not necessarily the same as a formal implementation order from the Central Bank of Iraq, an approved legal framework, a published timetable, or an official announcement specifying exactly what will happen to the exchange rate. And that brings us to the central issue surrounding this story. What does removing the zeros actually mean? In monetary policy, removing zeros is generally associated with redenomination. Under a redenomination, a country changes the numerical units of its currency. For example, if a government were to remove 3 zeros, 1,000 old currency units could potentially become one new currency unit. The purpose can be to simplify transactions, accounting, pricing, and the presentation of money after a long period of inflation or currency depreciation. It does not automatically create additional purchasing power. This distinction is extremely important for Iraqi dinar followers because the phrase, remove the zeros, is sometimes interpreted as meaning that a 25,000 dinar note will suddenly become equivalent to 25,000 US dollar, or that the exchange rate will immediately jump to 1-to-1. That conclusion does not follow from the terminology alone. A redenomination changes the unit structure. A revaluation changes the currency's official exchange value. Those two policies can theoretically be connected, but one does not automatically guarantee the other. If Iraq is genuinely moving toward a currency reform involving the removal of zeros, then the process could be considerably more complicated than simply printing smaller notes. Authorities would have to establish the conversion ratio, determine which existing banknotes remain legal tender, introduce or withdraw denominations, update accounting systems, modify banking software, adjust contracts and government records, communicate the change to businesses and households, and manage the transition between old and new units. There would also need to be a carefully designed timetable. That is why the reported statement that no specific date has been established is an important part of this story. A decision in principle and an operational currency change are not the same event. For ordinary Iraqis, the practical objective of such a reform would likely be simplification and improved efficiency, rather than creating wealth overnight. Large numerical denominations can make everyday pricing, accounting, cash handling, and financial reporting more complicated. Reducing the number of zeros could make the currency easier to use, particularly as Iraq continues efforts to modernize its financial and banking system. For dinar followers outside Iraq, however, the implications require a much more cautious interpretation. The most important question is not simply whether zeros could be removed. The bigger question is what exchange rate framework would accompany any currency reform. If Iraq redenominated the currency while maintaining the same real economic value, then the number printed on the notes could change without producing the enormous increase in international purchasing power that many speculative discussions assume. For example, imagine a purely hypothetical situation where 3 zeros were removed. 10,000 old dinars could become 10 new dinars. The number becomes smaller, but the underlying economic value represented by that amount does not automatically become 1,000 times greater. The conversion would simply reflect a change in the unit. This is why investors and observers should wait for precise official details before drawing conclusions about a new exchange rate. At the same time, the reported development is still worth watching because currency reform can be an important part of a broader economic modernization strategy. Iraq has spent years working on banking sector reforms, electronic payments, financial compliance, public sector accounting, and integration with international financial standards. Any future currency restructuring would need to fit into that larger framework. In the short term, the biggest impact of confirmed currency reform would likely be uncertainty and preparation. Banks would need to update systems. Businesses would need to adjust accounting and pricing systems. Government agencies would need to prepare legal and administrative procedures. Consumers would need clear information about conversion rates and the validity of old notes. Communication would become extremely important because confusion during a currency transition can create unnecessary economic disruption. The Central Bank of Iraq would also have a critical role. Monetary authorities would need to communicate clearly about the exchange rate regime, the conversion process, and the status of existing currency. If the government were to introduce new notes or withdraw certain denominations, the public would need reliable instructions about where and how exchanges would take place. For the Iraqi economy over the longer term, a successful currency reform could potentially make monetary administration more efficient. It could simplify financial reporting, improve transaction convenience, and potentially support broader efforts to strengthen confidence in the banking system. But the success of such a reform would depend on much more than the physical design of new banknotes. The underlying fundamentals of the economy would still matter: oil revenues, government spending, foreign exchange reserves, inflation, fiscal policy, banking sector stability, private sector development, international trade, and confidence in financial institutions would all continue to influence the dinar's real economic position. Changing the number of zeros on a banknote does not eliminate those underlying factors. This is also why today's report should not be presented as proof of a guaranteed dramatic exchange rate increase. The information described in the source material points toward a reported decision concerning currency reform and removal of zeros, but it does not, from the information provided, establish a specific future exchange rate, a specific launch date, or a guaranteed increase in the international value of the dinar. That distinction protects viewers from one of the biggest problems in currency speculation: taking one legitimate piece of information and extending it far beyond what the evidence actually demonstrates. There is another reason this development deserves attention. If the Iraqi government is genuinely preparing a currency change, the next pieces of information will be extremely important. Observers should watch for formal statements from the Central Bank of Iraq, the Iraqi government, the Ministry of Finance, and other relevant institutions. They should also watch for legislation, implementation procedures, conversion ratios, announcements regarding existing banknotes, and any official timetable. Those details will tell us much more than social media speculation ever could. For now, the responsible interpretation is that the reported announcement may represent an important development in Iraq's long-running discussion around currency reform, but the exact economic consequences cannot be determined until the official framework is made clear. For Iraqi Dinar followers, the key message is simple: pay attention to the policy details, not just the headline. If Iraq ultimately introduces a redenomination, the question will be how the old and new currencies are converted, and what monetary policy accompanies that transition. If authorities also change the exchange rate regime, that would be a separate and potentially much more significant development. But until those details are officially established, assigning a specific future value to the dinar would be speculation rather than financial analysis. So, as of this developing the 16th of August story, we have a reported confirmation concerning a decision to change the currency and remove zeros, along with the important indication that a specific implementation date has not yet been established. That is meaningful information, but it is only the beginning of the story. The next stage is verification, official documentation, and implementation details. If further official announcements emerge, they will be far more important than predictions about overnight wealth or guaranteed exchange rates. A professional approach means separating confirmed policy from expectations, separating redenomination from revaluation, and allowing the economic evidence to speak for itself. For now, Iraqi dinar followers should remain informed, patient, and cautious. Currency reform can be a major economic event, but its impact depends on the complete policy framework, the exchange rate mechanism, and the strength of Iraq's broader economy. Make sure to subscribe to Iraqi Dinar News for responsible, factual, and balanced updates on the Iraqi dinar, Iraq's economy, and important developments in monetary policy. We will continue to follow the evidence and explain what each new announcement could actually mean, rather than relying on speculation. And remember, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always conduct your own research and consider professional financial guidance before making any financial decision.